It's abundantly clear that something needs to change, but exactly how we force that change to happen remains unclear. With me to help parse this is Melvin Carter. He's the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota, and Tawanna Black, founder and CEO of the Center for Economic Inclusion. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. Mayor Carter, you and I spoke 4 months ago when this was all underway. And while there were very valid conversations underway about structural racism and injustice, one of the important conversations that you keep bringing up is the structural problems in the hiring of police and the contracts that police have and police unions that prevent mayors like you from getting the reform that you need.
That's absolutely right. Thanks for having me on again. And you're right. It was 4 months ago that we talked, and in that time, we've seen the same thing from the federal government around this crisis as we have around the pandemic crisis, around the economic crisis, and the answer is that's very little. In the meantime, mayors and cities and local communities across the country have had to act because of this absence of action at the federal level. We've had to act, and so we've seen mayors across the country try to rethink and renegotiate those contracts. We've seen mayors across the country. We're one of the cities that's doing that, rethinking our whole approach to public safety to make it much broader than just police, but a whole lot more is going to have to change.
Tawanna, one of the conversations that I'm having, with, which we're going to air in a little while, the conversations I had with voters here in Minneapolis, people cite statistics to talk about police violence against blacks, and depending on how you parse them, they come out different ways. So I want to present them in this way. Black Americans are just killed at a much higher rate than white Americans are at the hands of police. 1,329 total black Americans were killed out of a population of 42 million, 2,555 total white Americans killed by police out of a population of 197 million. So when you put that down into percentages, white Americans are killed at the rate of 13 per million, black Americans are killed at a rate of 32 per million. How are we supposed to reframe this?
We need to reframe this in a way that white Americans become just as outraged every time that they see black Americans killed by police as they are when they see white Americans killed, period. We need to start valuing the lives of black Americans in the same way that we value the lives of white Americans. And this is the same story of America's history, period. We need to see accountability, but it won't happen until all Americans begin to value life and then start to enact policy that allow us to drive accountability of our police forces consistently across America in ways that show that value.
Mayor, I want to quote to you from a Mother Jones article, which says, quote, "The key to understanding why officers across the country escape discipline time and again after beating or killing people by overturning firings, opposing the use of body cameras, and lobbying to keep their members' disciplinary histories sealed. Unions are challenging every mayor and governor are facing. Is there any way to make these changes at a level that affects the 18,000 police forces across America? Who does that? Is that you and every mayor across America? Is that state legislatures? Is that the federal government?
It's all of the above. We need action at all of those levels. Unfortunately, the bill that we saw passed at the federal level did very little to go in the full direction, and very few state legislatures, frankly, have gone, I think, far enough. At the local level, there's a significant amount of things that we can do, but then our hands are tied by things like qualified immunity, by things like, things that those unions have gotten written into state legislation across the country to make it very difficult to hold people accountable, again, for things like shooting someone in the back 7 times, things that we all know that had I done or had Tawanna done, that we'd be held accountable for immediately. It makes it difficult to uphold a rule of law in our country when we know that there's a whole class of people who are held to an entirely different standard than all the rest of us.
And Tawanna, how does the sentiment change? We're talking about policy changes, we're talking about justice changes. We may even see electoral change as a result of what happened here 4 months ago. But if sentiment doesn't change, that remains a problem. Do you think in the last 4 months, we've moved toward a change in sentiment, or are we moving the other way with people getting into their corners?
Unfortunately, the studies don't show the sentiment is changing, not fast enough. And unfortunately, for those where that sentiment is changing, it feels like it changes when it begins to affect you. When maybe families start to diversify a little bit, then sentiment starts to change a little bit faster. But it's not changing fast enough that people start to move their votes fast enough, where they start to hold their elected officials accountable for then enacting policies, again, that then drive real accountability on the ground.
So, Mayor, how does that change here? Are you hearing people saying the only way we're going to change this is with our vote right now?
I'm hearing people say that. And I'll tell you, the thing that gives me hope right now, as we see people in our communities across our country in the streets speaking up on social media, athletes speaking up and using their voice more so now than ever, that to me is the exact same type of energy that has driven us forward, driven this country forward through every chapter, through the civil rights and beyond that. And I think that's the energy that's going to continue to drive us forward as more and more Americans say, enough, we've had enough, and we're not going to accept anything short of fundamental change around this.
I want to thank both of you for your time and the work that you're doing and for joining us this morning on the banks of the Mississippi River here in this beautiful city of Minneapolis. Thank you to both of you.
Thanks for having us on.
Mayor Melvin Carter of St. Paul, Minnesota. Tawanna Black is the founder and CEO of the Center for Economic Inclusion.